The only reason people think that the Beatles are the greatest band of all time is because they've had the most sustained media campaign over decades and decades telling people that they're the greatest.
When I first heard the Isley Brothers Twist and Shout, and then I tried to re-listen to the Beatles one, I was like, wow, this is just a boy band version.
I keep it to myself that I'm not the biggest fan of the Beatles while everybody gushes. Like, I'm trying to be polite. Meanwhile, it's this very same artists have done so much to appropriate the Black progenitors of this art. I'm in trouble if I point out that I like the real thing.
How can you possibly think and say as a white person that you really truly think that objectively the greatest band of all time just so happened to be the band with the biggest marketing budget?
Because I don't believe any of these people are really excited about Pete Buttigieg and Kamala Harris. I'm still convinced K-Hive is a elaborate self-gaslighting cult. Like, I just do not believe those people really like her like that. I think they're lying even to themselves. Maybe I'm being...
Yeah, it's not real, right? In my experience, given that I've been now the subject of several K-Hive pylons, it feels identical. It does feel like a bot army. I've always been very reluctant to accuse posters of being bots because it starts to sound like a little paranoid at a certain point. But when you say something rather innocuous and then there's this flood and it's the same accounts that you were fighting with in 2016, it becomes very clear that this is just a transfer of all of that kind of Hillary men energy.
Yeah, exactly. I think she's just a stand-in for Hillary in a lot of their minds, you know? Yeah. I also think they kind of identify with her the same way they kind of identified with... not so much identified with Hillary, but identified with the people on Hillary's staff. Like, I feel like a lot of people...
Well, it's the same people. Her staff is Hillary's staff.
Yeah, exactly.
Her sister was Hillary's advisor. You know, and now she's her advisor. Now she's Kamala's advisor, Maya Harris.
Mina Harris is an interesting one. Something about her just seems very Tracy Flick from Election, where she just seems like she tries to be very polished, but it just doesn't seem very genuine to me. There's like nothing behind the eyes to me with... Mina Harris.
Well, look, the thing that was so notable to me, and it still kind of is interesting that no one seems to care, is that after all of the emolument stuff with Trump and all the corruption stuff with Trump, no one seems to bat an eye at the coordination between her kind of T-shirt business and personal merchandise that's all about, you know, her aunt's slogans and ambitious woman and this little girl was me and all of that.
Yeah, it's so bad.
And there was censure at one point. Like, she got chastised at one point.
And I'm not trying to defend Trump or cape for his people, but I feel like if Trump people did a fraction of that, you know, it would just not stop being blasted from the mountaintops. So it just seems funny how, you know, outside of like Politico or something, like no one talks about or reports this stuff at all with Mina Harris. Mina Harris is interesting because she had that phenomenal woman thing, right? And it was the Maya Angelou quote. Mm-hmm. And she had a lot of Black women posing in those things and
it was
putting
everywhere.
it on the social media. And she really focused on Black women and used a Black woman's poem and everything. And she was like really trafficking in that image like Black women. But then when you went to the website, because I always look at see where the money goes, and it went to all like the causes and nonprofits that like Hillary and Kamala and those people are affiliated with. Like, they were just general, like, you know, democratic, electoral, and white feminist stuff. Like, I don't think there was a single Black woman or Black in general group in the list that the money was going to.
I never looked at where the money was going to. I remember when that Phenomenal Woman, for people who don't know, there were T-shirts that just said Phenomenal Woman on them. And, you know, to her credit, for by whatever means, she was able to get every high-profile celebrity, Black celebrity, and others also. But, you know, Tracee Ellis Ross and, you know, the Williams sisters and Gabrielle. Yeah, probably. It was everybody. You know, name a Black actress or prominent singer or something like that, and they were in a Phenomenal Woman T-shirt at a certain point in time, like 2015-ish, 16, 17, I don't know when it was. But it was everywhere, and she subsequently has rolled that into other kind of like clothing lines, to the point that clothing lines that are affiliated with messages that are affiliated with her aunt, right? So ambitious woman, or excuse me, I'm speaking. Remember when Kamala Harris said that, or most famously, this little girl is me. And so Business Insider reported in February, they had an article titled "Biden's lawyers told Kamala Harris's niece Mina to stop using her aunt to boost her brand." Report says.
Oh, it was Business Insider. Okay, for some reason I remembered it being political. But yeah, that was the article. Whatever article it was that you're talking about, whoever did it, yeah, that's who I was thinking of.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's neither, it's neither here nor there. It's just, I do think that this sort of thing, Democrats talk about Republicans being hypocrites all the time. And then stuff like this happened. And it's like, well, you give them an opportunity. It's like a wide open.
Oh, and she's really expanded it. I'm noticing now she has phenomenally Latina. Phenomenally Asian. She has phenomenally Asian, phenomenal mother. She has phenomenal farm worker and phenomenally human. Like, oh my, I can't believe this.
Can you? Can't you though?
I don't know. Phenomenally Asian just seems like it's so cynical. Like she's not.
It's pretty cynical. But you have to get Mindy Kaling a shirt.
That's true.
That's what that's all about. Look, this is hardly in the grand scheme of things the worst thing anybody's ever done. I just did a segment on Rising on the Cuomo scandal and Chris resigning. So, everything in its stride. But when we were initially talking about, is there a sincere audience base for Kamala Harris or Kamala Pete presidency? Like, this is it. It's the same people who want these T-shirts, the same people for whom the idea of a, gay Black woman presidency is like peak political goals. I have a friend in DC here who lives in one of these new buildings. And when you go into the building, it's like, brand new. There's like restaurants on the first floor and all of this like built-in construction stuff, right? Like these luxury buildings. And on the walls in the building are like portraits of all of the folks that kind of woke liberals would love, right? So it's like Michelle Obama's on the wall, and then it's like Biggie, and then it's like RBG, and then it's like Basquiat.
It's so annoying, the Biggie stuff, because Biggie is just becoming like this mascot, and I don't even think these people actually know Biggie's song. But yeah, because I live in Brooklyn, and everything is spread love. It's the Brooklyn way, and they just put it on all these shirts, and you have all these like Park Slope moms, and I just can't stand it because they just all look like the kind of people that if tomorrow's Biggie was in front of their building, they'd be calling the cops like instantly.
100%. 100%. I'm not even in New York. Like, I kind of understand New Yorkers feeling some sense of identity, I guess. But DC, a DC apartment, a DC gentrifying apartment with Biggie, like,
really
adjacent to Kamala Harris and Michelle Obama and RBG. It's an RBG, BIG scenario.
You know what? I guess it kind of makes sense because, like, in Oakland, the Bay, they do Mac Dre. So Mac Dre is their biggie. Like the gentrifiers just put up Mac Dre everywhere. But DC, I guess, doesn't have its iconic hometown rapper, I guess, with a national profile to. So they have to go to the closest East Coast rapper, which I guess is Biggie. But that's funny. I didn't know that other East Coast gentrifying places were just adopting Biggie.
I think it's even worse than that. I think it's not even about needing a rapper. I think it's they know that their building is filled with a bunch of transplants that are here to work on the Hill or whatever. No one's actually from DC. And they're a bunch of, 35 to 45-year-olds that are missing their youth and when they used to be cool. And this stuff on the walls makes them feel less like they're living in corporate apartments and more like they're still living the life.
Yeah. Do you guys have a lot of those? Like, I hate this mix of high and low that they do, where they put like these fake graffiti murals, but they kind of look like very Etsy-ish and very too polished. Like, but that's what they're doing. A lot of these buildings here, they build like a luxury building with a doorman, but in the lobby they'll put like this fake graffiti mural throw up to give it a little bit of like fake grit, but it looks so art school. Like, it looks so nice, and it should be on a Etsy t-shirt. It's very
Yes, the genexification of our living spaces. It's like the opposite of no labels. It's like labels everywhere. It's a whole generation where we only define ourselves by insignia and references to other things, which is why, I'm really not trying to be a hater, but the idea that a shirt that just says phenomenal woman goes viral, like, what does that mean about our society? What compels you to buy a plain gray t-shirt that says phenomenal woman?
I'm actually reading this book now. What is it called again? It's something. I'll tell you the name of it now because I've been reading it on my phone. But it's pretty interesting. It's called "Hijacking the Runway: How Celebrities Are Stealing the Spotlight from Fashion Designers," and it's basically how all the models now. And I didn't know this, but you can look it up. It's really interesting. All the models now are all kids of celebrities, like the old days of like a Kimora Simmons or a Naomi Campbell or a Carol Alt just being discovered on some like street as a gangly 13-year-old by some like weird creepy guy, and
Right.
being told that can make you rich, and suddenly like in Romania somewhere, some like Eastern European girl who's like 5'11" just suddenly becomes a superstar, but she's like dirt
Right.
poor. Like
Right.
that doesn't happen anymore, where like a regular middle class or dirt poor person gets catapulted into stardom. That's all like it's Snoop Dogg's kid.
Kamala Harris's stepdaughter.
Yeah, Kamala Harris's daughter is it. And if you go on the modeling websites now, like Wilhelmina and these things, they all have influencer tabs now, and they all like say models and influencers. Like they try to, and they actually have like West Coast branches where they just do TikTok stars and influencers, and it's the same with the designers. Like Jessica Simpson, the book is interesting because it tells you how all these celebrity brands is basically somebody's making clothes, and then they just say, "Hey, Jessica Simpson, would you mind just letting us license your name?" So Jessica Simpson doesn't do anything except give them her name.
Yeah, but she is rolling in the dough over it. Isn't she like a billionaire?
Yeah,
close to
exactly.
it?
Oh, she's super rich off that, and she'll be on shows like Project Runway and those things as a judge, but she doesn't know anything about fashion. But the book was interesting because it was kind of showing how actual designers with talent don't really move the needle. Like people are so celebrity obsessed now. It's easier to slap a celebrity's name on it and then have a celebrity as the model for the clothes. So I can believe it. Like she's savvy. She realizes, as what you said before, all those celebrities that she put in the shirts was all she needed. She could have just had a blank gray t-shirt, I think. And all Serena Williams and all those people, the girl from Blackish, she covered every single age range, and had rappers, actresses, athletes, teens, tweens. And yeah, I think it's just really that simple. I just think she had celebrities. That's all people needed.
Now, are we being curmudgeonly old heads?
I definitely am.
Just saying, oh, I wish the world were different. Like in my day, I mean, is it actually better to have some, undernourished Brazilian girl or, Eastern European girl walking down the runway like a skinny colt about to get probably abused by the system than, some celebrity influencer who at least potentially has more autonomy and has built her own brand and has gotten there by grit and not just by shooting up to your point, 5'11" by age 12?
I won't say it's grit though, because the old models, because they needed the money to live. Like Carol Alt was talking about this, right? Carol Alt did this interview where she lambasted Kendall Jenner, because Kendall Jenner was like giving a interview where she's like, "Yeah, I'm not one of those models that does 50 shows a year and stuff like that. I try to be selective and do all that." And first off, she's not a great model. Like she can't really walk, like she's just not really good at modeling.
T, are you one of those people who became an expert on modeling from watching all of that America's Next Top Model?
Well, no, you know what? I used to just really be into fashion, so I just used to know this stuff. It's one of the things that might surprise people about me.
I'm surprised. Wait, I want to know more, but I don't want to interrupt you. But I do want to come back to that.
Yeah, but the whole thing that I was talking about was like we worked because we were poor. Like I was lifting my family out of poverty. Like you're rich, you don't have to work. This is just a dilettante thing for you to build your sister's makeup brand and all these different endorsements and whatever. But this is just like something that you do as a dilettante just to promote your other influencer hustles. But for you to like crap on girls who work all year round. So yeah, I don't think they even have that much grit. Like they just have their parents' name and they just do like 5 or 6 big shows a year. Gigi Hadid and Bella Hadid, for example, they're not like famous, but their dad is rich. Their parents are like super rich. If they're not, all the models now, if they're not actual celebrities or kids of celebrities, they're kids of like filthy rich people. So
who also were able to use that money. I mean, I truly don't mean this in a shady way. I embrace them doing whatever they want to do with their lives, but they also had the money to get the cosmetic surgery to look how they did. Like Bella and Gigi, they were to me always lovely girls, but did not look like they look now.
No. Ironically, I thought they looked better before. That's a real ironic thing. They look like
they cut off some ethnicity a little bit there. It seems like, but that's neither here nor there. Hey, Leslie.
Hey, sorry, I thought it was 10:30 p.m. like every other podcast I've done.
Oh,
because
I'm sorry. But we were just talking about how Tease secretly has his background and passion for fashion.
Oh, I didn't. Well, you can tell, but he wears T-shirts that are cut right, so you know that.
No, but I know a surprising amount about like women's fashion. That's
why
you're like that. What's the guy's name? The Ewan McGregor. There was a movie about this fashion designer. There was a male designer, but he only designed women's clothing. I forget the name of it, but it was actually a pretty good documentary. He used to do a bunch of perfume. Halston. Your mom probably had like a Halston bottle, but Halston, like his big passion was like, I used to see my mother wear these clothes and she wasn't happy with them and she couldn't afford them. So I got really passionate about women's fashion and designed nothing but good stuff for women.
Was Halston big in the 70s and 80s?
Yes, exactly.
It sounds familiar.
I'm still confused about how you got it. Well, first of all, let me introduce to our audience. Let's get the ball rolling. We've had a lot of pratter up top, but we know him, you love him. Friend of the show, both friends of the show on repeat appearances. Trevor Beaulieu of Champagne Sharks podcast. Welcome, Trevor.
Thank you. Always a pleasure to be here.
And Leslie Lee III of Struggle Session podcast. Welcome back, Leslie.
Hey, thank you so much for having me again.
Leslie, I was explaining to someone yesterday who you were. I was like, oh, tomorrow's episode is going to be this. And it caused me to reflect on something I hadn't reflected on in a really long time, which was the Bernie Made Me White hashtag.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Good times.
So good times back when there was hope.
Right. For those who don't remember, Leslie was the guy who coined this hashtag that went viral after Bernie won Hawaii and some other state.
Hawaii and Alaska.
Alaska. And the media reports were, NBD, these are white states. Let's see what happens when Bernie gets to, non-white states. If that probably sounds familiar to you. And a bunch of people observed, principally Leslie, that Hawaii is the least white state in the country, in the union.
Yeah, and Alaska is, not much further off, not very white states at all, but the script had already been written that they just were going to do it. And I joked ahead of time that they were going to do it, and they ended up doing it.
Yeah. So then this hashtag made light of how Bernie made us all white, and, hashtag I watched 8 seasons of Friends last night.
Well, now that I think about it, I probably could have started with Bernie made me white. I listened to all of the Beatles discography.
Well, thank you for getting us on track. The reason I wanted to talk to you both today is I saw you both embroiled in some Twitter fracas over this new Beatles documentary that's just come out on Disney Plus.
To be fair, Leslie more than me. I don't want to steal Leslie's thunder.
It was Leslie, and then I saw Andre involved, another friend of the show. And Leslie, I went back to look at your tweets and I saw that you had deleted one. Did it get too hot?
No, it's not that it gets too high. At a certain point, it's just like you're not going to get anything but incredibly unintelligent people yelling at you. And when you're talking about something like the Beatles, which is the biggest, most popular, most marketed band of all time, that means that the people talking to you are going to be the least sophisticated music fans there are. I'm sorry, that's not like an insult, but like if I was arguing with people if I was arguing video games with the Minecraft audience, you know what I'm saying? Like it's the most popular thing. Or even though I do respect the Avatar fans, but you know, if someone was going out around calling people crazy for not liking Avatar, everybody would know that person is like not connected to the real world, because some people might like Avatar, some don't. Just because it's the most popular one doesn't mean every single human being likes it. And so at a certain point, I was just like, I got rid of the one where I said, wow, white people, and all I said was white people. Say, Leslie? I said white people really love the Beatles. Just a few words. I forget exactly. I think I deleted white people really love the Beatles. Yeah, it was just those 5, and people got so mad. And all of them were white people, and they somehow thought they were proving me wrong by getting incredibly angry about this obvious fact that people have joked about, you know, for decades. Before most of these people were born, people were talking about how white the Beatles were. When the Beatles were first coming around, and these people's grandparents and great grandparents were out watching the Beatles, people were talking about, wow, this is really, truly, incredibly white music, versions of watered down, you know, blues and jazz, which the Beatles would cop to and admit to and have no problem to have no problem saying. But for somehow in 2021, I can't imagine, like, it just, when you go back and look at the musical history of the Beatles and the reactions to them, they were always getting backlash. They got backlash like NSYNC got backlash because they were a boy band, and all the people in the serious music at the time thought they were jokes. They saw all the merchandise and all that stuff, and people like did not like them. There were parody songs that were hits making fun of the Beatles. Like it was. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, I was gonna say, and people didn't realize too that a lot of that stuff that people call genius later is them trying to shed that image. Like it's a lot of almost overcompensation, kind of like how a lot of these boy band people, when they go solo or get big, they try to really shed that image. A lot of it was kind of reactive.
You gotta expose Janet Jackson's boob to show you're a real man.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I mean, Justin Timberlake just did it again with when he put it on his like jeans phase. What, Miley Cyrus did it. Taylor Swift's done it. Like basically all these pop stars have done this. But like for the Beatles are the most successful at this because they have been the most heavily marketed for decades and decades. People don't even remember from my interactions that the main reason people hate the Beatles is because once they stopped making music, the record labels kept reissuing the albums and trying to sell it again, and people were pissed off. I'm like, we have disco, we have new wave, we have hip hop coming, and you're trying to sell us the Beatles again. There's a song, I forget the name of the title, but the refrain is "Once was enough." Once was enough. We're done with Beatlemania. Once was enough. Listen to new wave. Once was enough.
How about the Clash? Phony Beatlemania is bitten the dust.
I mean,
but apparently it didn't.
Yeah, I mean that's is that exact reference to that thing which every single person mad at me has heard and sung along to, but for some reason they have gotten amnesia because of a Disney Plus documentary, which I swear to God, none of them have watched. Absolutely, positively, none of them have watched.
Or at least not watched from beginning to end. I think they mostly watch Twitter clips.
Yeah, they watch clips from Twitter. They watch promotional material.
Well, it is 7 hours long, so I will cut them some slack. I only watched the first installment, which is like an hour and 45 minutes in and of itself. But let me ask you this though, Leslie, because you did it. You're talking about people who have been critical of the Beatles and have hated on the Beatles over the last, like 30 years or 40, 50 years since the end of their height, right?
And no, since the beginning. Since the beginning.
Sure, since the beginning. But your tweet wasn't even about hating on the Beatles.
No, it wasn't.
All you said was white people like the Beatles. And I think that is fascinating.
And they were so angry about, it's predictable too. I should have predicted it. I should have thought better of it, but it was like at 6 a.m. and I was just kept reading these responses to the documentary, which were not the same responses that I had to the documentary. They weren't responding to the documentary. I realized they were just responding to clips people were posting, and they were just saying, "Oh my God, the Beatles are such geniuses. This is amazing. This is the most brilliant thing." If you actually watch the documentary, it's making the entirely opposite point.
So tell us about the documentary for those who haven't sat through the hours and hours of footage.
Yeah, so the Beatles Get Back. First thing you have to say is that it's not really a documentary. It's a collection mostly of just long rehearsals. It's the sort of thing that would come in a box set for a super fan to buy. It's not something for mass consumption. I've talked to a lot of Beatles fans who said, I can't get through that, because what you're actually watching is them working on their songs, and you're hearing the worst versions of those songs you've ever heard, because they're just starting them and they're not playing well. They're not in sync. At this time, they're personally not getting along. They are trying to push out an album like, someone locked in a room trying to push out jingles. They're literally,
that's what's happened. So they have an album deadline, right? They had one. They hadn't performed together live in years. They did one performance, decided they really liked the feel of it, and so they set themselves up in a room that they planned to actually have the performance in, and they wrote their songs in this room, and they had like a 2-week window or something like that to put together an entire album and then perform it. So they were under the gun.
Yeah, and they did that to themselves. And what's apparent as soon as the documentary starts is, people have this idea that songwriting, making music, especially music that's really popular, it comes from the ether, people say, or you come in with a very heavy concept and artistic vision, and you have this really deliberate thing or feeling that you want to do. They didn't come in with that at all. At like in the first 5 minutes, John Lennon is like, yeah, I pulled out like 100 old crappy songs that weren't very good. Maybe
when they were teenagers.
Maybe we can turn these into some, like, they're clearly like, they're making the album because it's their job. Okay. They are workmen. They're going into the office every day, and most of the time they're fucking as miserable going into the office as anyone else is. It's a fascinating vision, because the idea of the Beatles as, this band, this, artistic collective was not really true to their formation. It wasn't true on this album, obviously. Maybe with the, Sergeant Pepper, you can make that argument, but that's not who those guys were. They did not start this band because they had, this grand, artistic vision. They talk constantly about the fact that they can't fucking play their instruments, that they're not very good. Like every time they talk about like George Harrison, who's generally
go ahead. I'm sorry.
Generally considered the best musician in the band. Every day every day he walks in talking about how great Eric Clapton is, like he's a fan. Literally, he walks in like 2 or 3 days in a row. Man, I was watching Eric Clapton on TV. Man, he's so freaking good, man.
Also, Ray Charles's band. He goes on, right? Waxes poetic about.
People don't understand that even Eric Clapton himself is pretty overrated. Like Eric Clapton used to idolize Prince and would say things like, I wish I could play like Prince. And Prince is not even someone that people think about. Like guitar is one of Prince's throwaway instruments. It's not even like,
Okay, you're gonna come for Eric Clapton too. You're gonna chase away my entire white audience, fellas.
Well, Eric Clapton is a talented guitarist, but he may not be the most.
He's a talented guitarist, but there's a lot of black guitarist who are as talented as him.
Okay, let's back up for a second, because I really want to press on this idea of what exactly set people off about your tweet, Leslie. Because what to me it says is it burst the bubble of white hegemony a little bit. Is why people got upset. Because we all have experienced people making these throwaway statements cavalierly. Oh, I just don't like R&B. Oh, I don't like hip hop. We had a whole episode about the extent to which white people don't know who people like Nia Long and Taye Diggs are. There are all these cultural deficits that white people have that they never get called out on because they're the majority. Yes. And if occasionally a black person pokes their head up and says, I actually don't subscribe to your cultural value system, heads explode.
Yeah, I mean that's basically it, and it's so unnecessary because first of all, the Beatles are the most popular, but I can't hurt the Beatles,
Yeah, you can't.
by talking shit about them. And what the really infuriating thing, and the thing that kind of pissed me off and made me feel so sorry for the actual Beatles, who is that they didn't want any of this. They didn't want this reverence. They don't think of themselves, at least as musicians and songwriters, that highly, and that's what the documentary exposes. That's what Peter Jackson, he could have easily made this a 90-minute triumphant documentary where you see them struggle at first. George quits the band, they bring them back, they overcome, they have that pretty good concert at the end. The concert at the end is very good, but instead, what does he do? He shows us 6 hours of them absolutely fucking up songs all the time, sounding really bad and amateurish, which is how most musicians would sound when at this point in their career, at this point in the creative process. The fact that they're revealing this, unfiltered, is actually surprising and interesting, even if you're not a fan of the Beatles. But the Beatles fandom has just taken like 30 seconds clips of them doing kind of okay with one of the songs and saying, look at these brilliant geniuses, all of a sudden making out of thin air the great hit song Get Back.
Okay, but Leslie, devil's advocate, you don't think there's something kind of magical about hearing the tunes that have become so familiar, whether or not you want to be listening to Beatles in America, you can't not know all the Beatles songs.
I think you can. I think you can not know them. I don't.
Well,
but
that's true. My mom was always like, Brianna, how do you know all that Beatles music? And it's because actually, when I was learning to play the guitar as like a middle schooler, all of the songs in the guitar books are Beatles songs.
Yes, which should be the first sign that maybe what they're doing is just making music
easy chord progressions.
Yeah, like the Beatles are not. No one thinks the Beatles are a super sophisticated band for the most part. There are some exceptions, and they did a lot of interesting stuff, and they built kind of the foundation for what a rock band is and become. But that's just it. It's the foundation. It's not the most complex iteration. It's often the simplest iteration that the Beatles are doing, and that's fine. And I'm not, you can watch this document, but as far as you asking me about the magic, no, it doesn't seem magical. It seems like work. It seems like I really want to push back on the magic idea, because these are 4 regular working class guys who talk like they're at work, who just want to like hang out with their girlfriends and not have to deal with this stuff.
Yeah, Yoko is very present.
Yeah, who are just, but she's mostly just like sitting there like equivalent of scrolling on her phone. She does not bothering them. They have a discussion where they 40 years ahead, they say how stupid people are for blaming her for breaking up the band. But as far as the magic goes, it's like, it's just songwriting. Anybody writing any song is gonna look the same as the Beatles writing the song, but
it's not that the Beatles are unique. I don't think the argument is that the Beatles are unique in their songwriting, but rarely do we get to see anybody write a song that has become such a huge hit and a part of so many lives, to see it come into being. You don't think there's something kind of fascinating about hearing the first time anybody heard even a glimmer of what A Hard Day's Night is going to be?
I just don't think it's true that we don't see it. I mean, there's tons of footage of albums being made in the late 90s or 00s. You couldn't buy a CD without getting like a DVD with the footage. So I don't really think it's that unique. And we've had this audio since it was basically recorded. That's how we know the first version of Get Back was actually called No Pakistani. So if you're like and that was the clip that people picked out as the magic song. They played 59 different versions of the song Get Back. They could not get it right. It took them forever to get it right. That's not really like. But is that magic.
A criticism? To me, that is why it's so interesting. It's showing what you don't often get to. I mean, you're saying that we see all these examples of this. I personally can't think of another example of watching a songwriter kind of go through the entire
I'm saying
process
that's why I like it, because it's exposing that songwriting is something that anyone can do. That's the exact like when you respond to that and say that, oh, this is magical and this is all, where does that get you? That doesn't put a guitar.
I don't mean magic as in not grounded in work or reality. I just mean that it's something that it's revealing something behind a curtain that we normally don't get exposed to, and it's kind of wondrous when you really appreciate the product. Trevor, get in here. Sorry.
I think what I get what Leslie's saying, that like there is a lot of footage and things like that with other bands, but I think it's kind of a circular thing where because the song is iconic,
it's because the song is iconic. This
process feels more special because you know the song that's coming and it's very special to you. But there's plenty of like because when CDs first came out, CDs have a lot more space than an LP or a cassette. So what they started doing is when they started releasing albums on CD, it's like the albums used to be like 30 to 45 minutes because that's how long an LP or an 8-track could fit. So they're like, we have all this room on the CD. So if you buy a lot of classic albums in CD format, they fill up the second half with all these bonus tracks and rehearsal tracks and take ones and all this stuff. So and then they started putting like bonus like DVDs into the CDs when DVDs came out. So it had these special editions. But those songs to a lot of people aren't huge, just to like hardcore fans. So I'm into like Iggy Pop, and there's tons of Iggy Pop type of behind the scenes, early cuts, but that doesn't capture the popular imagination. It's just like a handful of people like me who just really like Iggy Pop.
Well, that's because Iggy Pop isn't the Beatles.
Well, no, that's what I'm saying. Like, I think what you're talking about appears for a lot of people, but the Beatles, I think even the most mundane things take on a transcendence because of the pre-existing reverence that, you know, they kind of have.
Yeah, exactly. Like what I'm saying is that's why I like the documentary, that it is mundane and that you see them play 59 bad versions of a song before they play one good one at the end. And that's the magic of it. All this footage exists for other bands, other albums, other songs. It's just that the average Beatles fan would not know this because as I said, the average the Beatles fan is not that sophisticated music fan. I have a hard drive right here. I can pull you up demo tracks of what Billy Corgan was doing in his basement in 1988. Like we have all this stuff. It's just that like most people, music fans, they don't even listen to albums anymore. Like we were jumping from people not even listening to albums for the past 10 years to diving into like 30, 40 live demo versions. And
now
with
like YouTube, we have a ton of these clips on YouTube.
Oh, yeah.
Even.
I remember when it was, I think the 30th anniversary of, was it We Are the World? Must have been. There was this long Rolling Stone piece about the backdrop of how it got put together, and there were these lovely cute little anecdotes about how Bruce Springsteen apparently showed up in like a pickup truck without any entourage, and he was such a lovely unassuming man, and how Bob Dylan couldn't hit a note and Michael Jackson was kind of horrified by how unmusical he was. And it was a really great read, a long read. And then there was all this video that they put up as well of the behind the scenes making of the song. And it had that same effect for me. You take an iconic song with so many famous people involved, and then you get to see them all in one room, like 30 stars interacting with each other, seeing who can do it in one take, see who's kind of a mess, see Michael Jackson's neurotically like looking at everybody, trying not to
Isn't that clip the best?
Them. It's
Michael
so
Jackson's
good.
face.
It's so good.
Who was the one hitting the note? Was it Huey Lewis? Somebody was hitting a note and he just looked like so horrified. Do you remember who it was? Do you remember, Leslie?
No, because I've actually never watched the clip because I've always hated We Are the World, and I've always respected Prince for not doing the song because he thought it was garbage.
I mean, fair enough. But look, it's iconic. And I will confess to being that person who does subscribe to that reverence, even though it's not my bag. I will say, though, my Leslie Lee troll tweet moment where I realized there were two Americas was when I grew up listening to a lot of Aretha Franklin in my house. And I remember the day I was pretty old. I want to say like maybe a teenager when I discovered that Aretha Franklin did not originally record Eleanor Rigby. And I heard the original Eleanor Rigby by the Beatles and was horrified.
I mean, that's not an unusual experience. I think most people, I mean, my God, we're not boomers. The only time we should hear the Beatles in our lives are cover songs. So of course most of us have heard cover songs, and I think you tend to have a I don't know if you would call it not a confirmation bias, but if you
like
hear
what you've heard first.
yeah, you like what you heard first, and also technology has gotten better, music technology, in part thanks to the Beatles, but like
objectively though, Eleanor Rigby's version is better. Like Eleanor Rigby, Aretha Franklin's version is better. Eleanor Rigby is not my favorite Beatles song. I'll just say that.
My hot take is I actually like the Beatles version better than Aretha Franklin's. Even though Aretha Franklin's is better musically, it just doesn't fit the actual what the song's about, because it's about like this old lonely woman dying, and then Aretha Franklin just comes in. It's like Eleanor Rigby. She's all like upbeat and whatever, and it's like, okay, this lady's dead, and then like I like it better musically, but she was like, F what this song's about. I'm just gonna come in and just sing an Aretha song. So it's like that tonal disconnect is why even though I like it better musically than the Beatles one, it just doesn't really fit the mood of the words.
Fair enough. I mean, this reminds me of that conversation that always comes up about what makes an artist versus what makes a singer. And there's this weird kind of race and gender component of this, I find, where you'll get people arguing that, Beyonce isn't a real musician. Aretha Franklin isn't a real musician, even though she played so many instruments and arranged all of those songs and stuff, because they're just singers. And then you have people like the Beatles or Bob Dylan who are not especially competent singers or musicians, even according to other people. I can't weigh in on whether the Beatles were competent with their instruments, but
Quincy Jones did.
Oh, let's go to the expert. Let's go. I'm going to read that Quincy Jones quote. But yeah, like there does seem to be this, I think, sometimes unearned reverence for people because of the aesthetic of who they are. This idea of a singer-songwriter, regardless of whether or not they have actually excelled in that arena, more so than someone like Aretha Franklin, or because they're in a band as opposed to a solo artist, or the fact that they're not strong vocalists is almost evident to the fact that they must be really great artists on the other side of things.
Yeah, and you're just describing rockism, which a lot of people complain about, and starts with the Beatles, and it's so ironic because they did obviously start as this very unserious boy band. At least their marketing did, and really this is all about marketing. Like all of the only reason people think that the Beatles are the greatest band of all time is because they've had the most sustained media campaign over decades and decades telling people that they're the greatest. If the record companies thought they could make as much money telling you that the Kinks were, or Jimi Hendrix was, or anybody else, you would also be getting that. And you do get some of that. You walk into the mall, you can buy a Jimi Hendrix t-shirt still 30, 40 years later. This is marketing, and people recognize this when it first happened. Beatlemania was a marketing phenomenon, a cultural phenomenon, and they brought it back, like they, bring back, a new product. But at a certain
album. I had the one album.
The one album. That was the one I remember when they brought the Beatles back. And hey, we were re-releasing the Beatles. You can buy this again. But at a certain point in the past, and people complained then too, but at a certain point in the past 20, 30 years, and Mark Fisher talks about, this general thing a lot, we kind of decided to let the past take over our current culture, and it's only looking back. And so the Beatles never leave us. And so I have 17-year-olds cursing me out for not even criticizing the Beatles. People who weren't even alive at the point. Like, how corny is that? I remember very clearly in the 80s, if you went around saying that, I like the Beatles, people were like, what are you talking about? What, the Beatles are kind of done at a certain point. And then number ones come out and they come back, and it's just this endless regurgitation of this stuff. And the documentary shows us that half the time they were just fucking talking gibberish. Jojo, G-Wab, Ja, Baba, and they were just saying whatever to make these songs come out, and we have to pretend that they're the greatest things that ever been recorded, when that's not what they wanted at all. They wanted the money, but they didn't want all this pressure and this elevation.
Every 10 years, there's like a Beatles big product that makes everyone rediscover the Beatles. I remember in the 90s there was this Beatles box set, and that was the first time I tried to make myself like the Beatles, just to see what it was about. And I started with this box set, and some of the songs were good, but I just could not really get into it. But what really killed it for me was when I finally got into like the old like rhythm and blues, like not what people call R&B now, but what they called rhythm and blues back then, which predated rock and roll, like the precursor to it, like what they used to call race music, rhythm and blues,
Yeah, all the shit
Delta-
Led Zeppelin
Delta-
stole.
Delta, the Delta blues, the Mississippi blues, all this stuff. And then when I started like hearing that stuff, especially the songs that the Beatles remade and the Stones remade, I was like, wow, this is like, the Beatles are way closer to Pat Boone's Tutti Frutti than they are to John Lee Hooker. Like, I mean, the only difference is they at least tried to put some black inflection into their voices. At least they made an effort, whereas Pat Boone didn't even bother. But honestly, like, I think the distance between them and John Lee Hooker is way, way bigger than between and Muddy Waters than between them and Pat Boone. Like, when I first heard the Isley Brothers Twist and Shout, and then I tried to re-listen to the Beatles one. I was like, wow, this is just a boy band version of that song. It doesn't even come close. But
which is what makes the salt in the wound even worse, because we live our whole lives ignoring that. I keep it to myself that I like the Aretha Franklin version. I keep it to myself that I'm not the biggest fan of the Beatles while everybody gushes. Like, I'm trying to be polite. Meanwhile, it's this very same artists have done so much to appropriate the black progenitors of this art, and I'm expected to. I'm in trouble if I point out that I like the real thing.
Well, here's the thing: the Beatles would not argue with you. They wouldn't. They Paul McCartney said in like 1984, like, oh, all our favorite people are black. Like they don't like they're people. This is one aspect of it that I really didn't understand, because most people mad at me were not British; they were Americans. The Beatles, when they came to America, I feel were fairly horrified by the average white person that they interact with. And that's part of the reason why they stopped touring. And like they did not want to be these white icons that people are using to say that these are the progenitors of everything, because they respected all the artists you were
and it comes
T.
out in the documentary.
Yeah, and they love it. Like they only start getting it together when they bring a black guy into the studio.
Yeah.
It really just doesn't start working until they bring old boy in. But they never were dishonest about this. They talk in the documentary constantly about how every other band has better songs than this. Even other white bands, like this documentary is being recorded in like 1969, 1970. You already have Iggy and the Stooges. Tell me one human being who could hear, the Iggy and Stooges song and then hear, the Beatles song from that same time and think that the Beatles is the one that's really pushing artistic boundaries. I don't think you could really think that. I don't think you can listen to Get Back and I Want to Be Your Dog, basically made the same year. And like, it sounds like they're made decades apart. I think, even like, as I said, it's really worth going back and looking at the contemporary view of the Beatles and how the Beatles viewed themselves, because that's been entirely overtaken by the mythology, which is they were just these amazing, great artists this whole time who transformed all of music with their genius, when absolutely none of them would say that. They were like, even like, this is the last time they're playing. We're watching them be together for the last time. They're not in sync. They don't like each other. They don't like their songs. They don't like their music. They barely able to creep it out. And the documentary does a great job by putting the actual recording of the album over the credits, because it's a fucking afterthought. The main thing the documentary is about is the relationship between these four guys at work, why they stopped getting along, how they started getting back together, and ultimately like how they didn't really fix the fissures in their relationships, and even though they knew exactly what they were. And it's just a fascinating documentary about people, human beings.
Yeah.
And when you bring in the Beatles trademark LLC Apple Corporation, it just becomes, this ridiculous and often very racist mess, and reactionary too. It's like, it literally, I don't know what other word to use to say, like, it seems fairly reactionary to yell at people, to still be like championing the music of your grandparents and your great.
Well, have either of you said, Trevor, to your point, you mentioned that there seems to be a new Beatles vehicle every few years. I remember Beyond the Universe or whatever came out when I was in high school. I recently saw this movie. I wanted to know if either of you had seen it, called Yesterday from 2019.
Oh, yes.
Is that the one with the Indian guy?
Yeah. The conceit is he basically wakes up in a world where no one but him has ever heard of the Beatles.
Yes.
Yeah,
and he's a songwriter and an unsuccessful one, but he starts, quote unquote, writing Beatles songs since nobody knows about them but him.
Yeah, I've actually seen this movie a couple times. I thought the way they advertised it was very much boomer bait, but it's actually not, because they're fairly cynical about everything, especially in the first half of the music. They're like, life sucks, music sucks, culture sucks, blah, blah, blah. It's not really like a super sappy movie, and he's like a con artist when he, starts stealing the Beatles songs. The problem with the movie really is that the Beatles songs are just like so basic, you can't imagine that somebody playing them today would be like amazed by them. That's the main problem with the movie. I think otherwise the movie is kind of okay, and it's not trying to be as annoying as you think.
The problem I had with the conceit too was that since the Beatles were just replaying black music, like I just don't see how, if the Beatles didn't come along, some other white group wouldn't have just done what the Beatles did, because the blueprint was there. Like it was just the thing that bothered me about the conceit of the movie was that all the black music was already there. So if the Beatles music did not come around, people would have known the sound. You know what I mean?
So like in the first scene where he realizes other people don't know the Beatles, he's sitting around with his friends playing the guitar, and he just starts playing Yesterday. And everybody goes quiet, hushed tones. And they're like, oh my God, that was so gorgeous. And he's kind of like, yeah, I mean, it's yesterday. And they're like, what do you mean it's yesterday? And then he realizes nobody knows but him. But they're all just like ensorcelled by Yesterday. And I'm like, Yesterday's a solid hit, but like,
I know,
it's a little unrealistic.
They do push back on it a little bit, because when he plays stuff for his parents, they're just like, oh, that's nice, dear. Like the exact reaction your parents would have if you wrote a hit song.
Yellow Submarine, like no one's gonna be impressed by that.
Yeah,
and something people don't realize too is when you're already famous, it helps your later songs. Like, you know what I mean? So we have no idea what Yesterday would have been like by a totally unknown group. It might have been a hit,
that's great,
but not as big a hit as it was as when people already love the Beatles and you're already anticipating the next song, and you have millions of people as a built-in audience to whatever you're gonna drop next. It changes things a little bit. It's hard to really judge the song objectively in a vacuum, because when Yesterday came out, it was the newest Beatles song, and the Beatles were already a huge phenomenon. Like there's something like Wrecking Ball by Miley Cyrus. If she wasn't Miley Cyrus, would it have been as big a hit? It might have still been a hit, but at the time, Miley Cyrus was already big, so people are waiting to hear Miley Cyrus's next song.
And of course, as Black people who, remember, the 80s, we know that Black music just was great, but it was just not played on TV. It was not played on mainstream radio. Like, how can you possibly think and say as a white person that you really, truly think that objectively the greatest band of all time just so happened to be the band with the biggest marketing budget and that the most famous? Like, it's so strange that people actually like think this, that they don't consider that there were other artists at the time who may have been better but just didn't get the support, who just weren't famous, who weren't that cute,
like, or who were Black.
Yes.
My mom always is fetching about this, about how we'll be in the supermarket or whatever, and they're playing all these Motown hits. And she's like, well, when I was growing up, they never played this stuff in public. We were told that we were dumb, crude animals for liking this kind of music, and unsophisticated, and why didn't we like X, Y, and Z? And this was like jungle music. And now all of a sudden it's everybody's fave. And so that's a little bit where this resentment comes from, I think. It's not just like, we can't let you enjoy the Beatles. It's that you told us for all of these years that our stuff was like garbage. There was a two-tiered segregated musical system. And all of a sudden you expect us to buy in to your thing because now you've come around and realized that, like, Luther Vandross, or they don't even know about Luther Vandross, but, Stevie Wonder is good or whatever.
Yeah, but here's the thing: Motown was in a lot of ways deliberately watering down black music to appeal to white audience. So it's even worse. Like we were trying to reach them. I remember,
and it was still jungle music.
Yeah, I remember around maybe 2010, like white hipsters started putting on parties where they would go to bars and just play Motown music. And I asked someone, why are y'all doing that? Like, these are people I know, my same age. Like, I'm not going to a bar to listen to Motown and I'm black because that's my parents' and grandparents' music. And when I asked them, they said, oh, because the music has soul. That was their answer. Like Jackson 5.
It's like people in the 60s like going up to Harlem to like watch black people dance like in the 1920s or whatever, you know? Speaking of Motown and the black perspective, maybe we should go ahead and read this Quincy Jones take.
Oh, yes.
Quincy Jones, remember, by the way, a few years ago, he had that interview in, I think, New York Magazine where he spilled the tea on everybody. And he was like, I was having a threesome. This is from that?
Yes.
Okay.
If it's about the Beatles, it should be the same one. Now, I do want to mention that I brought this up because people were saying, of course, I'm crazy and don't know what I'm talking about for suggesting that maybe the Beatles aren't universally the best band of all time. But surely Quincy Jones may have some, you know, standing in this courtroom. But I was told that Quincy Jones is in fact he's senile. When he gave that interview, he was crazy. He's mentally ill. People told me with a straight face. Well, obviously Quincy Jones was mentally ill at this moment in this interview that I just learned about today.
Yeah,
otherwise, he wouldn't say that.
What are the ironies of that?
People speak truths.
You know, one of the ironies of that excuse is my father had dementia, and one of the interesting things about being senile, having dementia, is it's the newer stuff that you can't remember. Like, you will actually remember things from like decades ago, or your formative years or your peak years, shockingly clear. So my dad could remember with alarming specificity, like things from like the 60s or the 70s and stuff. So even that senile thing doesn't really work. Like, the senile thing is more like usually what happened last month.
Yeah.
So it's not even a good excuse. Like, even if he was senile, I would totally trust him on his impressions on what he thought in the 60s.
And he didn't say anything that the Beatles don't say about themselves in this documentary that none of the fans apparently watched.
Okay, so here's the quote. However, when attempting to promote a Netflix documentary and U.S. television special, Jones decided to ruffle a few feathers when he heavily criticized Beatles drummer Ringo Starr. Jones, 88, was speaking in an interview with New York Magazine when he frankly opened about his first impressions after meeting the iconic Liverpool band. Quote, "They were the worst musicians in the world," he said, adding, quote, "They were no playing motherfuckers." Paul McCartney was the worst bass player I ever heard. Scene.
And again, the movie backs this up. Several years later, after them playing with world-class musicians, they still mostly suck, and that's okay. That's okay. Like, it's not a bad thing. That's not what you go to the Beatles for.
Yeah, there is something, I will confess, I'm being a hater because there is something satisfying about popping the bubble of white hegemony. Like, I don't care if anybody likes the Beatles. I like the Beatles. I bought that one album and listened to it in high school. Like, it is what it is, you know? But it does feel it's more than just being subversive. There's something that feels like reclaiming some kind of like artistic equality by pointing out that it is possible. There are people that don't think like you. Like, in my world, my other come to Jesus moment, and when I realized there were two Americas, was in 5th grade. I might have said this on the other episode, but I was in 5th grade, and our teacher, Mrs. Roskins, our music teacher, asked us to name our favorite artist. And being a 10th grader who didn't know anything about anything and who was living overseas, I didn't have a favorite musical artist. So I said Luther Vandross because that's who mom was playing nonstop at home. And I remember her saying, like, "Oh, who is that?" and asking me how to spell it so she could write it on the board. And I thought I had just said Elvis Presley. Like, I thought I had just said the most famous person in the world in my context. And I was rattled to my core.
Yeah, I remember in 5th grade, talking to somebody, and I think this is the key to why so many people are obsessed with the Beatles, because I think their parents indoctrinate them fairly young, or their grandparents. But I was in 5th grade and talking to some people, and they, to the white kids, and they were like, "Wait a minute, you don't listen to the Beatles?" I'm like, no, I'm black. My family listens to black music. I'm sorry to say, people got upset with me when I said this on Twitter as well. And like, people were quoting me, like non-white people were quoting me. It's like, well, I'm brown and my family plays the Beatles all the time. Like, well, congratulations.
Yeah.
But my family was very concerned about me knowing black music and black culture. I think that's not a bad thing. And I don't think that's a bad thing, especially because they were not playing black people on TV at the time, and I would not hear that music in the radio. And I don't know why that was considered a bad thing to say, like, my family focused on black music, because they're playing of it. Hey, guess what? Guess who else's family listened to black music? John, Paul, George, and Ringo. They listened to black music too. They were not at home listening to I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say to you. They didn't listen to white music either.
I don't dislike the Beatles as much as I dislike like their fans, especially their American fans. Weirdly enough, usually the British fans would be the most obnoxious, but the American ones are the most. And I think it's because of that inherent racism in America just makes them more obnoxious than even the British ones, because a lot of British people love real soul music. It's very interesting. In a strange way, they appreciate real soul music even better than Americans, to the point that all our big bands and all our big groups had to go over there to make a living a lot of times, because they couldn't get, like, Americans would rather listen to the Beatles into like the 80s and 90s and, like, you know, give the black icons money. But England, where the Beatles were from, were always still constantly searching for the real uncut stuff. It's very interesting to me that that there's a whole Northern Soul movement, and like they'll know obscure black music, British people, that really surprises me. When I find out how deep their like pedigree is for knowing soul music. And white Americans it reminds me of what Bill Burr was bashing Philly for having a Rocky statue, but not a Larry Holmes statue. And he was a real person. I feel like America's like that with black music. Like they'll rather worship the Beatles and the Stones than their own homegrown
black musicians.
And it's like with Floyd Mayweather versus Conor McGregor. The American
Great
guy.
White Hope.
These people are usually the most jingoistic people. Yeah. There's an American and an Irish guy, and these white people are like rooting for the Irish guy.
Yes,
because rooting for the black guy is just that hard for them, even though he's American. They don't want to. They would rather root against America than root for a black person.
Well, Trevor, this has happened multiple times in UFC. There's the USA chants that go up when it's an American fighter versus a foreign fighter. But it's happened where they've given USA chants to Australians and Canadians against fighters who are might be from Puerto Rico, right? Who are actually American. That's happened. So, and you mentioned British people being into black music. In Japan, you see the same thing. Real like jazz. If any jazz artist goes over to Tokyo all the time, that's one of the hippest spots. And I would always get stopped on the streets by these old Japanese cats who would be talking, and they would find out I'm from Louisiana. Oh Lord, would they start going off and know every single blues man that there is. That's not what these Americans Beatles fans for the most part seem to be. And it's not even like in real engagement with the music. I keep seeing people use this term solved problem, meaning that it's something that's already been decided on. I think the Beatles represent a solved problem for a lot of white people. If you just accept in your heart that the Beatles are the greatest band, you don't have to really think about music that hard. You don't really have to make any choices. You're always going to have t-shirts and mugs to buy. You're always going to be able to listen to something. You just don't have to think about it anymore.
And you're instantly part of one of the biggest clubs on earth. It's like the least edgiest. Oh, by the way, I had a brain fart. I said Larry. I think I said Larry Holmes. I meant Joe Frazier. Joe Frazier is the one from Philadelphia. But that Bill Burr was talking about. You know something they said about, it's a safe bet. It makes me think of a bigger rant that I have with online, and I feel like ever since Chapo and Bernie first run, where he didn't win, but he inspired a lot of people. Weird Twitter, or shitpost Twitter, grew into this really kind of cool thing where it was a small group, but you have a lot of like normies now suddenly want to be part of this club. So I feel like there's a lot of people who have this superficial weird Twitter shit poster style, but they're total normies. They don't actually have an original joke or an original line or an original anything. They just take what 10 genuinely creative people did before 2014, like drill, and just repeat it and think they're as clever. Like, it's kind of like when people would recite Dave Chappelle punchlines in the 2000s and thought it made them funny. You know what I mean? Like, no, you're not a comedian. You're just repeating a punchline everybody knows. Like, just saying I'm rich bitch does not make you a funny person. But I feel like that's what like weird Twitter is now, is that it's very much a bunch of normies who have a very...
So you're saying that these people are now the same energy that people are using to valorize the Beatles?
Well, no, like what I'm saying is that I feel like when weird Twitter or shitpost Twitter was actually generally weird, what Leslie was saying would not have been a big deal because the people didn't want to be listening to their parents' music or
grandparents.
Grandparents, or they didn't mind being iconoclastic or speaking against the grain. But a lot of these people now are just boring normies who just know how to have a weird profile that has like weird shit posting graphics.
Yeah, they just know how to be like aggressive to people. They know how to
be aggressive, but they also know how to have like a bizarre aesthetic. Like you look at their page and you're like, is this a guy or a girl? What's going on? Why is there an anime? Like they know how to be weird, but the weirdness is from a cookie cutter template. So like, I know I first noticed it when someone at the Baffler wrote something that was saying Steven Spielberg did a lot to ruin cinema because he dumbed down a lot of stuff and he just made movies for like 10-year-old boys. And I like Steven Spielberg movies. I'm nostalgic for them, but it's true. Goonies is not like
Excuse me. Wait a minute. No, excuse me.
Yeah.
My favorite film is a Steven Spielberg flick, but it also has a soundtrack by Quincy Jones. And that film is The Color Purple. And we will not be besmirching.
Well, he made movies. Unfortunately, he didn't stop then. Unfortunately, he did not stop after The Color Purple.
1985?
Yeah.
I think Color Purple was his trying to play against type, where he was trying to be like, I'm going to do a serious movie. Like, I don't dislike Steven Spielberg. I like him for what he is, and, he has this fun popcorn movies, but left Twitter or weird Twitter should not have been as angry as they were about that article. But all these people got really upset. And it's like Steven Spielberg was the Marvel movies of his day.
Yeah, the most normie, basic stuff. And Brie, I forgot to mention this earlier. White people don't like to be reminded that they're white, obviously, because white is never, ever cool. It never has been. It never will be. You bring me the coolest white person that ever lived, James Dean, and you bring me a black guy and call him a cracker and have in the same room and tell me that James Dean is cool. There's never been and people get mad at us at me on Twitter. And I think you too, because like there's nothing they can do to break it because we don't have the At no point has any of us ever asked a white person like what they think is cool about music, movies, or anything else. That's just not who we are. We don't care. And that's the same for any black person. Y'all didn't care about us. We don't care about you. If we made your opinions a central part of our identity, we would be fucking insane. You know what I'm saying?
But a lot of the specific accounts that were coming at you were people who I've seen normally always try to cultivate this air of hip detached weirdness,
Yeah.
suddenly go earnest and
For the Beatles, the craziest thing you could pick. It's not.
it's going apoplectic or whatever that word is.
Earnest for the Beatles might be the title. Yeah, I feel like that phenomenon you're describing, though, Leslie, I think is part of why people get big mad at Black women too, because that divestment from the popular opinion, popular judgment of what's good and bad. I think for many reasons that we could get into, Black women, Black people have had to create their own cultural values, aesthetic values, self-esteem separate and apart from white people, or else you end up having no self-esteem. And when Black women in particular, are walking around proud and flexing and talking about how they love being melanated and all of this stuff, it clearly rubs some people the wrong way.
Yes.
It clearly upsets some people. But what that's all about is affirming your own values separate and apart from the mainstream society. Because if you care too much about what mainstream society thinks as a group that is so kind of marginalized in the social strata, then you would be throwing yourself off a cliff. Like you wouldn't be able to make it in this world.
And to bring the white people into this, like you don't have the Beatles money, okay? Why are they more chill about this than you? Why do they act like regular ass working class dudes about going to the office, and you are acting like a ultra conservative freak about their music? That doesn't make sense to me. You should be watching this and saying, wait a minute. The guy down the block plays guitars and makes songs like this. Why don't I go listen to him? There's somebody in your neighborhood as good as the Beatles. I'm sorry to say, but there's somebody in your and that's not knocking the Beatles. That's just saying that we are all talented. We all have gifts, but we don't cultivate them. We don't have the opportunities. We're not given millions, billions of dollars to spend time writing it. I think the idea that the Beatles are any artist really, except for maybe a very few, are just these ultimately unique musicians, it just seems ridiculous to me. Because first of all, why would an industry previously set up to chew up and spit out young cute people who didn't write their own music, play their own instruments? Why would that industry be the one to discover the greatest musicians of all time? That just doesn't make sense to me. Like it just so happened that way that the record companies, once they got this mass production up and running, they were able to find the greatest band of all time. And since they kept making money with them, they kept calling them the greatest band of all time. I just don't. That just seems too coincidental to me.
And if you research and and then take deep research, I mean, just casual research, you realize the role that Brian Epstein and George Martin played in cultivating the whole image. Like they were like when we say the boy band thing, they were like the Lou Pearlman of their time. Like Lou Pearlman was a guy that found all those '90s boy bands, I think including NSYNC. But like they came up with like a formula. They did a lot to cultivate that image, including if you look at the old Beatles stuff before Martin and Epstein got to them, they dressed like motorcycle punks. They dressed like Martin Brando in The Wild One, and I think it was Martin that made them change the whole look to the skinny suits and the ties and the mop top. But there's old pictures of the Beatles, and I think if they had that old look, they would not have made it as big. But yeah, they're very much a product, which I think a lot of people don't want to admit. But something you said, I think, is actually a feature and not a bug, in that I think, and we see this a lot to this day, I think there's something in people that likes to lionize something good but totally achievable as genius, because it makes them feel like they can be a genius too. Like when you look at something like Prince or Stevie Wonder or Ray Charles or like Sister Rosetta Thorpe, you can look at that and be like, damn, let me just put this down. Like, what am I doing? We look at Michael Jackson. It's like, what am I doing? But if you look at Justin Timberlake, it's like, you know what? If I trained, I could probably do that.
That's deep, because they're because a lot of the people arguing me say the opposite. Is like, no, I don't want to think about music. I could never do this. I'm in total awe. But you're saying maybe they aren't being honest.
Yeah, I don't think they're really being honest. I think they know if they really tried for a couple of years, they can do. Like, Justin Timberlake's a hard worker, but you can see him counting the steps.
Okay, I mean, the 2020 Experience was a solid album.
Solid. That's really the key. Impressed. The key word would be solid. Okay.
I think without Timberlake, I think Timberlake could have taken anybody with a marginal amount of talent and produce the 2020 experience. I think that's Timberlake. I think it's Timberland.
Timberland.
Really.
Yeah.
Not to expose our business on the streets, but I kind of feel the same way about Jay-Z.
Ooh. Wow.
I mean,
You're
I'm a
just trying
Jay-Z
to come
guy,
for
so I
everybody.
I can understand Jay-Z, but I find he's very similar to the Beatles to me. He's very similar to the Beatles. I don't think he's the best rapper, but he works hard at it and he puts the hours in, except when he doesn't. Except when he's on Kanye albums and he fucking sinks every verse.
Post Black album Jay-Z, I don't count as Jay-Z. I just count that as Beyonce's husband. But pre Black album Jay-Z, I'm a believer.
I know we have to wrap, but I just wanted to ask you one question that I've been ruminating on for a few minutes here, which is, do you think that there is a Black Beatles? Is there someone equivalent who, if somebody came for them on the internet, we would lose our minds and become total normies?
When you say we, you mean Black people?
Black
or you mean
people.
Like maybe
people.
Stevie Wonder? I feel like, especially like us college educated Black people, and I'm one of them. Like, I love Songs in the Key of Life, and if
It's my favorite album.
Yeah. I feel like Songs in the Key of Life, if he came for that, a lot of Black people would totally lose it. I mean, Stevie in general, but if you came for Jungle Fever Stevie, I think people would be okay. But if you came for like his whole discography, but specifically that Hotter Than July, Songs in the Key of Life period, I think Black people would really lose it. Luther maybe too.
Yeah, but they don't even like know who Luther is. That's the thing that makes me crazy. Like, there's no
generationally. I see what you're saying.
They're like, there almost can be no Black Beatle. I mean, no Black version of this because we don't have the same expectation that people know our stuff.
Yeah, it's true. Including younger generations of Black people. I feel like white people kind of drill their music into like each successive generation, and at some point I think we stopped doing that.
I think there's no answer because we don't have the same mythologizing elements where we don't believe all of our favorite artists are like deities, in the same
We
manner.
don't. We don't talk about Prince that way. We don't talk about Michael Jackson that way.
Man, people talk shit about Prince and Michael Jackson back in the day. All we did was make fun of them back in the day. I remember.
Not back in the day, because that was their same point about the Beatles, that back in the day, there was plenty of criticism, but today they're valid.
I mean, black people. I just feel like the black people don't really approach. Like, you can't approach media like this because you are constantly told everything you like is garbage. So how could you possibly get it in your head that anything you like is hegemonic? That you would be as crazy as a white person to be black and think that.
I'll tell you as a Gen Xer why we really kind of kept old Black music alive was because the rap we came up with was so sample heavy that we kind of ended up liking old stuff because we'd find out, this is where this iconic beat came from. But I think that's
me
really
today. Like, I'm not a hip hop head. I don't know anything about anything, but because I grew up overseas and was not connected with new music as it was coming out as much as I think I would have been if I were here, I was leaning heavily on my parents' music, and I'm like, Kanye has a new song that samples the Ponderosa Twins. Like, that's why I like it. I'm weirdly good at identifying hooks and samples.
Yeah.
Despite being terrible at hip hop more broadly.
But sample-based hip hop is dying, so I really wonder what's going to happen to future generations, because I feel like they won't have that gateway into, finding that old music.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate both of you taking the time to just complain on the internet with me today. We haven't had a lighthearted pop culture episode in a while, so I think this was much needed, and I hope people appreciate it.
Fun.
You guys are both, like, sincerely two of my all-time favorite cultural critics in this space. You know your stuff. You watch the things. You come prepared. You have an amazing historical perspective on so many different topics, from music to sci-fi to, like, everything. So where can people find you and listen to more of your work?
Speaking of coming prepared, it's so funny you said that, because the last one we did when the guest didn't come prepared, I was so upset because it's all the comments wanted to talk about.
Yeah, they really dragged poor Dr. Thrasher. We talked about it, and we're going to work it out going forward. Everyone has their mulligans.
Yeah, but you can go to champagnesharks.com, and that is all our links. If you want to support us in just one way, go to patreon.com /Champagne Sharks. That's the best thing you can do. But yeah, just go to champagnesharks.com. All the links are there.
Yeah, you can find Struggle Session at patreon.com/struggle session. And I will be talking with my co-host Jack Allison about this documentary, who is a white Beatles fan. So he may be able to shed some light on it. But please check us out, patreon.com/struggle session or sesh.plus.
You guys really should do that. I'm not kidding. I have really curbed my podcast diet these days, but I listen to both of your podcasts and like Katie Halper and like the West Wing thing, and that's my entire UFA and PodSafe. You know I listen to PodSafe. You got to keep abreast of what the liberals are doing. All right, thank you both, and to our audience, a reminder that you can subscribe at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. I also have been doing debrief sessions on episodes of Bad Faith over at Callin. You can download the Callin app and call in live, ask me questions, give me feedback directly in a way that you can't do in this kind of one-directional podcast format. So remember, you can do that. I'm trying to do that a day after these episodes are released. So on Tuesdays and Fridays. Remember, you can help support us if you don't want to become a subscriber yet by going to our YouTube channel and liking the videos and subscribing to the channel and turning on notifications so you get notifications of drops, including extended clips from premium episodes that you won't have to pay for. And again, thank you for listening. And as always, keep the faith.
Hey YouTube, thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.